Alaska sells glaciers, grizzlies, and the last American frontier, but travel far enough beyond the postcard version, and you find another Alaska entirely. Places so remote, so strange, and so completely off the radar that most Americans don't know they exist. These are 13 Alaska places you almost certainly didn't know were there. 13. Whittier. Whittier sits at the end of a 2.5-mile tunnel that is the only road access to the town. The tunnel shares its passage with a railroad and operates on an alternating traffic schedule, meaning there are windows of time when you simply cannot leave. Most of the town's population lives inside a single 14-story concrete building called Baggage Towers. School, church, grocery store, medical clinic, all inside, all under one roof. Whittier was built by the U.S. Army during World War II as a secret military port. The concrete infrastructure was designed for function, not comfort, and the town has never fully escaped that original intention. The mountains surrounding Whittier block sunlight for months. Annual rainfall exceeds 170 inches. The tunnel closes in severe weather. Whittier is not a place that happened organically around shared community values. It is a place that was built for a military purpose and then left for civilians to inhabit. The difference shows in ways that are difficult to describe and impossible to miss. 12. Adak. The United States Navy built Adak as a full military installation during World War II and expanded it aggressively during the Cold War. At its peak, Adak had schools, hospitals, a bowling alley, a movie theater, grocery stores, and complete infrastructure for 6,000 people. It had everything a functioning American city needs. Then, the Cold War ended, and the Navy decided it no longer needed Adak. The base closed in 1997. Nearly the entire population left within months. Today, roughly 70 people remain inside a city designed for 6,000. The empty housing blocks, the shuttered gymnasium, the abandoned chapel, the streets laid out in a complete grid that leads mostly nowhere are all still there. Adak is the most complete physical portrait of abandonment in America. It is not a town that declined gradually. It is a town that was evacuated and then quietly forgotten by everyone except the 70 people still living inside its empty bones. 11. Attu. Attu is the westernmost point of the United States, sitting so far out along the Aleutian chain that it crosses the 181st meridian and technically enters the Eastern Hemisphere. During World War II, it was the site of the Battle of Attu, one of the most brutal and least remembered engagements of the entire Pacific Theater. American and Japanese forces fought in Aleutian fog, freezing mud, and terrain so hostile that more casualties were caused by the environment than by combat. Today, Attu is essentially uninhabited. A Coast Guard navigation station operates there with rotating personnel who do not stay long. The Aleutian fog rolls in and sits for weeks without lifting. The battlefield is still there, largely untouched, the remains of both armies absorbed into a landscape that does not distinguish between nationalities or outcomes. Standing on Attu, America doesn't feel like a country with a capital and a flag. It feels like something that started far away and simply ran out of land here without quite meaning to. 10. Cold Bay. Cold Bay sits at the tip of the Alaska Peninsula where the Pacific Ocean meets the Bering Sea, in conditions that make the word hostile feel inadequate. There is no road to Cold Bay. There has never been a road to Cold Bay. The only access is a small plane operating on a schedule the weather treats as a suggestion rather than a commitment. The Aleutian wind here doesn't arrive in gusts. It arrives as a permanent condition that the town has simply organized itself around. Roughly 75 people live in Cold Bay year-round. Most are there for specific employment, wildlife refuge management, weather station operation, the kind of work that requires human presence in places humans don't naturally choose. No restaurant, no coffee shop, no grocery store in any conventional sense. Cold Bay has one of the best preserved natural harbors on the Alaska Peninsula and some of the finest brown bear and waterfowl habitat in North America. The bears and the birds are not inconvenienced by any of this. The people have learned to work around it. 9. Kennecott. Kennecott sits inside Wrangell St. Elias National Park, the largest national park in the United States, accessible by a 60-mile gravel road that discourages casual visits effectively. It was once the most productive copper mine in the world, pulling ore so rich that the company processing it became one of the most profitable industrial operations in American history. Between 1903 and 1938, Kennecott produced over $200 million worth of copper and employed hundreds of workers in conditions that were isolated by any measure and extreme by most. The mine closed in 1938 when the ore ran out. Workers were given 4 days' notice and the town was abandoned almost immediately. The processing mill, the company buildings, the power plant all left standing exactly as they were on the last working day. Kennecott is one of the best preserved industrial ghost towns in America, frozen in 1938 in the middle of an Alaskan wilderness that has been slowly, methodically reclaiming it ever since. The red buildings against the glacier backdrop produce a visual that photographs cannot adequately prepare you for. 8. McCarthy. McCarthy sits 6 miles beyond Kennecott at the absolute end of the 60-mile gravel road through Wrangell St. Elias. Population under 50 years old. No cell service. No hospital. Emergency response measured in hours on days when the weather cooperates and not at all on days when it doesn't. McCarthy was the supply and entertainment town for Kennecott during the mining era, the place where workers went when they needed something the company town didn't provide, which was considerable. When Kennecott closed, McCarthy lost its reason for existing, and most of its population followed. The people who stayed and the people who arrived later to replace them made a specific and fully informed choice about what they were trading and what they were keeping. McCarthy in winter is one of the most isolated inhabited places in the continental awareness of most Americans. The darkness accumulates in January in a way that stops being a weather condition and becomes something more structural. The people there call it home without apparent irony. 7. Metlakatla. Metlakatla sits on a net island in southeast Alaska, accessible only by float plane or ferry, and holds a distinction that most Americans are unaware of. It is the only federal Indian reservation in the entire state of Alaska. Every other Alaska Native community operates under a different legal framework. Metlakatla exists under reservation status because of a specific and unusual history that sets it apart from every other Native community in the state. The community was founded in 1887 by William Duncan, a British missionary, who led a group of Tsimshian people from British Columbia to Annette Island after a dispute with Canadian authorities. Congress established the reservation in 1891. The community has maintained its distinct identity, its fishing rights, and its legal status ever since. Metlakatla is not widely known outside Alaska. The island keeps its own counsel about most things and has for over a century. 6. Tenakee Springs. Tenakee Springs sits on Utqiaġvik Island in southeast Alaska with no road connection to anywhere. Access is by float plane or the Alaska Marine Highway ferry on a schedule that requires planning. The town has one main path along the waterfront, not a road, a path wide enough for foot traffic but not for cars. There are essentially no cars in Tenakee Springs. That is not an accident. It is a policy the community defends actively. The town exists around a natural hot spring, feeding a bathhouse at the center of community life. Men's hours and women's hours are posted and observed. The population hovers around 100 year-round, swelling in summer with people who come specifically for the quiet, and the bears that wander through with a familiarity suggesting they consider the arrangement mutual. In a state full of places remote by geography, Tenakee Springs is remote by choice. 5. Chicken. Chicken sits near the Yukon border in a landscape of boreal forest, permafrost, and winter temperatures that regularly drop past -50. The population hovers around 7 years round, swelling to a few dozen in summer when the road becomes passable and gold dredging brings seasonal workers. Chicken is one of the most remote road-accessible communities in Alaska, which in Alaska is a meaningful distinction. The town was originally going to be named Ptarmigan after the state bird abundant in the area. The founding residents couldn't agree on how to spell ptarmigan and settled on chicken instead. That story has been repeated so many times in Chicken that whether it's true no longer matters. The post office is real. The school closed years ago. The bar operates seasonally. Chicken endures with a name chosen by people who couldn't spell and a population that has never let that go. 4. Whalesback. Whalesback is a small volcanic island in the Aleutian chain that does not appear on most maps and is not accessible by any scheduled transportation. It sits along the Aleutian Arc where the Pacific Plate subducts beneath the North American Plate, with consequences that are geological, dramatic, and entirely indifferent to human presence. Named for its profile from the water, a long curved ridge resembling a surfacing whale. No permanent population, no infrastructure, no reason for most people to know it exists. The Aleutians contain some of the most dramatic and least visited landscapes on the planet. Whalesback sits somewhere in the middle of that chain, doing what Aleutian Islands do, rising from the North Pacific, taking the weather and waiting out whatever comes next with the patience that only geology can sustain. 3. Talkeetna. Talkeetna sits at the confluence of 3 rivers in south-central Alaska, population under 900, serving as the primary staging point for Denali expeditions. Every serious attempt on North America's highest peak passes through here. The town developed an identity around that proximity, part frontier outpost, part base camp, part deliberately eccentric community that cultivated its own mythology with considerable skill. For nearly 20 years, Talkeetna's honorary mayor was a cat named Stubbs. Elected as a write-in protest candidate, Stubbs served with approval ratings that human politicians in Alaska rarely achieve. He died in 2017. The town mourned genuinely. Talkeetna is the kind of place where that story makes complete sense. It takes the wilderness seriously and itself only as seriously as necessary. 2. Barrow. Barrow, officially renamed Utqiaġvik by its Inupiaq residents in 2016, sits on the Arctic Ocean at the northernmost point of the United States. The sun does not rise for 65 consecutive days in winter. It does not set for 82 days in summer. Permafrost beneath the town runs hundreds of feet deep. Polar bears are not metaphorical here. They are a practical concern navigated with the matter-of-fact awareness that comes from generations of proximity. The community has existed here for over 1,500 years. The Inupiaq people built a civilization in conditions most humans cannot survive visiting for a week. Subsistence hunting of bowhead whales remains central to community identity in ways outside observers consistently underestimate. Utqiaġvik is not remote in spite of its history. It is exactly where it has always been. The rest of America is simply a long way from it. 1. Supai. Supai sits at the bottom of Havasu Canyon, a side branch of the Grand Canyon, 8 miles by trail from the nearest road. No vehicles reach it. Mail is still delivered by mule, the only place in America where that sentence is present tense rather than historical. The Havasupai people have lived in this canyon for centuries. The turquoise waterfalls that made Havasu Canyon famous on social media bring hikers from around the world, but change almost nothing about daily life at the bottom. Limited electricity, limited running water, a school, a small lodge, a post office served by mules. The isolation of Supai was never chosen. It was inherited, defended across generations, and survived through circumstances that outside observers have consistently underestimated. That is a different and considerably more significant kind of remote. Alaska is the last place in America where the map still has edges that feel genuinely unresolved. These 13 places are not curiosities or footnotes. They are what happens when geography, history, and human stubbornness combine in conditions that the rest of the country never had to develop a tolerance for. Alaska doesn't apologize for its distances. It never learned to. These places are proof that it never needed to.